President Ball's Board of Trustees, distinguished alumni, colleagues, faculty, family and friends, and most importantly, class of 2010, thank you for having me. It is one of the greatest honors of my life to be here with you today. I must admit, it was a bit of a shock to me when I found out I was asked to speak at the 150th commencement of Augustana. Like most of you, I have multiple email accounts, and the one that the Augustana emails go to is the 5th of 5 email accounts, the one where all the spam goes. Last November, I happened to be perusing that particular email account, which I check about once a month, when I found out when I found an email from Augie, shortly after reading an email in which I was offered $6 million by a Nigerian prince. I read the invitation from Kai Swanson and then did what any good Midwestern boy would do. I called my mom to share the news. I read the email to her over the phone and then told her I was already incredibly nervous, to which she replied, quote, "You should be nervous. You haven't given Augustana a dime since you graduated." Which I'm embarrassed to admit is true. But I promise to you, Board of Trustees and President Ball, that I'll be a regular contributor to the college after today. Last night, while enjoying the evening with several of my own classmates from Augustana, none of us could remember who spoke at my own commencement. I'm incredibly embarrassed to also admit to you that I found out today it was a physician. Doesn't bode well for me. It's clear from that limited bit of data that the key for me today is brevity, a bit of levity, as I'm one of the few things standing between you, class of 2010, and the diploma worth $160,000 that you so richly deserve. And it's also unlikely in a couple years' time to even remember what I said. So that takes a little bit of pressure off. In fact, after months of agonizing about what I would say today, most of the words that I will share with you today were actually written this very week, while I was in Haiti. After the earthquake on January 12th, that's actually where I've spent most of my time. Thankfully, I was not in Haiti when the earthquake hit. I had left for Boston at the end of December to spend holidays at home, both in Boston and Skokie. After hearing the news of the earthquake on the afternoon of the 12th, I flew down to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic the next day and was able to cross over to the border in Haiti on the 14th. As you heard, I actually began working in Haiti shortly after leaving Augustana, but nothing I had seen in those 12 years had prepared me for the devastation that was wrought by the earthquake. Thought to be the worst natural disaster in this hemisphere in over a century. Upon my arrival, a full 48 hours after the 7.0 quake first hit, the first thing I noticed after exiting the plane was the smell, which was overwhelming. The bodies that littered the streets gave the entire city the smell of a charnel house. That morning, I made it to one of the few hospitals still standing and found hundreds of people lying on the ground in the hospital courtyard with very severe, life-threatening wounds. Compound fractures, closed head injuries, crushed limbs, facial fractures, and countless other injuries. There were barely any patient staff or healthcare providers available, as many of them had either perished or were digging their own families out of the rubble. In those first few days, we aimed, with very few resources, to set fractures, start IVs, clean wounds, all under makeshift tents in the courtyard of the hospital. For some of these patients, it was too little, too late, and as far too many succumbed to their injuries. In the ensuing days, 2 weeks, there was some improvement. Many medical teams, many medical professionals, international and national, came down from all around the world, set up field hospitals, and went to work treating the sick. Thousands of lives were saved. but they are considered the lucky ones, as over 250,000 of their brothers and sisters perished, and over 1 million were left homeless, many of whom were also injured as well. Since those first few weeks after the earthquake, I've been back and forth between Haiti and Boston frequently. I'm actually joining you today, coming straight from Haiti via Boston and Chicago, because I'm still looking for a direct flight from Quad City Airport to Port-au-Prince. This past week in Haiti was full of meetings, which brought me in, out, and through Port-au-Prince on a daily basis. As I gazed out of the car on the ruined houses, crushed cars, rubble-filled streets, and thousands of people living in makeshift tents, I thought about how I would convey to all of you what Haiti was like now, 4 months after the earthquake. In the first few days of the quake, we were too busy to look up. Our goal was to try to save the lives of those around us, never really having time to take a breath. Now, driving through Port-au-Prince, I had time to really take stock of what's been accomplished over the last 4 months. And to be honest, it looked like very little. Despite all of the effort that's been put in by countless men and women, Haitians and non-Haitians alike, during the last several months. Every single federal building, including the National Palace, is still in ruins, and the actual government of Haiti isn't faring much better than the buildings they once inhabited. Progress is at a snail's pace, and the suffering, which is measured at a scale that is unprecedented in recent history, continues unabated. Which brings me to the first of several questions I will pose to you, graduates, today. How does one stay engaged in a process of movement or a situation, however large or small, that is fraught with frustration, defeat, and loss? I don't know the answer to that question, but as I stared out at the ruins of Port-au-Prince, I was reminded of a conversation I had with a friend some months ago who told me about a book he had recently read. In the book, Good to Great, the author James Collins wrote about a conversation he had with Vietnam prisoner of war James Stockdale. Stockdale was shot down in 1965 over North Vietnam and taken prisoner, where he was tortured and beaten for several years. When Collins asked Admiral Stockdale about his coping strategies as a POW, Stockdale replied, quote, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted that. Not only would I get out, but I would also prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining moment of my life." When Collins asked about who didn't make it out of the POW camps, Stockdale replied, "Oh, that's easy. It's the optimists. They were the ones who said, we'll be out by Christmas. And then Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they'd say, we'll be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart." Stockdale finished by saying, "This is a crucial lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be." Collins dubbed Stockdale's strategy the Stockdale paradox. Haiti has long been a good example of the Stockdale paradox, at least for those of us who have worked in Haiti, but more so for most Haitians. Prior to January 12th, Haiti was the poorest country in the hemisphere, with the worst health indices, unemployment, literacy, and food safety in the hemisphere. And yet Haiti gained its independence in 1804, the second country in the hemisphere to do so after our own, but the first and only country born of a slave revolt. The last 206 years have not been kind to our southern island neighbor for a variety of reasons, some of which are the source of fierce debate, but most of which are clearly documented in the historical record. For most Haitians, especially the 80% who live on less than $2 a day, you might say their lives are characterized by the Stockdale paradox. They have to confront the brutal reality of their daily lives as some of the most impoverished people on the planet, yet always have an enduring hope and faith that one day things will improve. But then January 12th happened. But to my surprise, most of the people who I encountered after the quake were as hopeful after the quake as they were before the quake, despite losing limbs, loved ones, and livelihoods. This is certainly the case for my friend and colleague, Toussaint, who is named after a hero of the Haitian independence, Toussaint Louverture, a pharmacist in the hospital where I'm based in Central Haiti. He was in Port-au-Prince on January 12th, learning Spanish in an afternoon class when the quake hit. The building he was in immediately collapsed, falling on top of him and those around him. He soon found himself alive, but trapped. His left arm caught under a large concrete column. To his left, he saw his Spanish teacher, whose lifeless body lay only a few inches from his own. To his right, he saw nothing. The wall had collapsed. He was trapped like this for over 48 hours. Several months later, I actually finally had the courage to ask him about those 48 hours he spent under the rubble. While trapped, his chief concern was not whether he would escape, but rather his crushed arm, which was excruciatingly painful. After he was pulled from the rubble, he was brought to a hospital where the doctors told him his arm could not be salvaged, and it was amputated. He's now back at the hospital, our hospital, working again, learning to live and be a pharmacist with one arm, with a smile, and in the process of being fitted with a prosthetic arm. It's clear that most of us in this room won't face such heroic circumstances, nor will most of you work in places as far-flung as Haiti. So what, if anything, can be learned from the Stockdale paradox? The paradox is less about one man than about his unwavering faith and courage while in the crucible of adversity. And if we look back at recent history, we can see James Stockdale's everywhere we look. What else but faith and courage kept Nelson Mandela going while he was in prison for 27 years and ultimately led him to the presidency of South Africa? What else but faith and courage keeps our brothers and sisters in the armed forces going while at war in Iraq and Afghanistan? What else but faith and courage allowed my parents and grandparents the fortitude to persevere after being beaten in race riots, forced to eat in colored restaurants, and sit at the back of the bus? What else but faith and courage kept all of our grandmothers and great-grandmothers fighting for the right to vote in this country? What else but faith and courage got me through John Klaus's brutal calculus class? As you leave here today and embark on the rest of your lives, all of you in this room will encounter situations, large and small, that are seemingly impossible, from finishing your next degree to finding a job in the midst of a recession to controlling your privacy settings on Facebook. But what Admiral Stockdale and all of the nameless Stockdales out there teach us is that these struggles are not only worth fighting for, but they are incredibly important in how they shape our lives. I wouldn't be the person I am today I wouldn't be the same person were I not to have embarked on a medical career to serve the Haitian poor, although I'd likely have a lot more hair. But like Admiral Stockdale, I would never give up the dreams I've had, the struggles, defeats, victories for anything, nor the hope and faith that things will improve in Haiti. My second question to all of you today is why any of you should even care about places like Haiti, or the impoverished in Rock Island, or the homeless in Chicago. I'm often asked why I have chosen to pursue a career path that is not exactly going to have me on the list for the next episode of MTV Cribs anytime soon. And again, I'd be lying if I could give you a concise answer that could encapsulate all the reasons I have chosen to work in rural Haiti. But the question always gives me pause. Not only because I'm often asked that question with a great deal of negativity and skepticism, but also because I've wondered if there was something I could point to in my past, some crystal clear event or conversation that led me to give up some of the creature comforts and work abroad. I was raised Catholic, and in reflecting on my career path, I didn't want to count out those 2 intense years in CCD of having a role in my choices. Perhaps there were some subliminal messages in those Gregorian chants that you were forced to listen to. So, in search of answers, I embarked on the task that I, in fact, had already told my CCD teachers and had none that I accomplished those many years ago. I attempted to read the Bible. Well, I didn't get very far. More specifically, they opened up the New Testament, read a few pages, lasted about 12 minutes, and and then watch the most recent episode of Family Guy on Hulu.com. But in those 2 pages, I did come upon something profound, something that I wanted to share with all of you graduates today: the corporal works of mercy. In this case, mercy is meant to connote a virtue influencing one's will to have compassion for and alleviate another's misfortune. It is a strange bit of irony that I would even be perusing the Bible. I was never very religious, but my time in Haiti, repeatedly bearing witness to overwhelming poverty and suffering, has caused me to ask a series of questions I can't answer, and I have trouble finding those answers in the context of my religion. But the reason I bring this up is not because I love confessing things to you, like an episode of Jerry Springer, but rather because I believe that corporal works of mercy and the concept of mercy itself transcends any particular religion and strikes at the heart of what makes us human. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, shelter the homeless, visit the sick, and bury the dead. Like many proclamations of the past, sacred or secular, it's best to think of these less as a literal prescription, but more as a framework by which to align your moral compass. These 7 tenets can be thought of as a beginning of a way in which to engage the world around us. For example, we may not all know someone in prison, but that fact should not preclude us from thinking about how we, as a free society, can protect the rights of our fellow citizens who have been incarcerated. It may be difficult for some of us to find common cause with the homeless, but we shouldn't use that as an excuse to marginalize them and fail to be advocates on their behalf. We cannot let the comforts of our own surroundings shield us and prevent us from reaching out to others. That said, the corporal works of mercy take on a very literal meaning when working in rural Haiti, or with the world's bottom billions. They are all in desperate need of what the works of mercy prescribe. What responsibility do all of us have in this room to people we may have never met, or might not ever meet? People who come from different cultures, speak different languages, or practice different religions. Would it be easier, or should it be easier, if they look like us or talk like us? It is the very use of us and them that begins to divide us. When you think of your neighbor as other, it's easier to marginalize him or her. Look away from them, walk past them, or change the channel. Once the homeless, the hungry, the prisoner, the child with malaria, or the man with HIV are relegated to being somehow different from you, the challenge to extend your hand to them is already fraught with difficulty. The concept of us and them, first world versus third world, inner city versus suburbs, these are false constructs that only serve to deepen inequality and entrench division within our own society and between societies both here and abroad. All of us in this room are not members of the bottom billion. By virtue of our maker, or perhaps the cosmos, those of us here today are in fact some of the luckiest people on the planet. Don't get me wrong, the class of 2010 is like my class. I know that each and every one of you worked incredibly hard to get here today. There are some of you here who are the first in your families to earn a college degree. There are others who beat every conceivable odd to finish your college degree. But with that privilege comes responsibility. A responsibility not only to the bottom billions of this world, but to some of the people sitting right next to you that may need your help in ways you may not even imagine. It's a pretty tall responsibility for all of us, but collective effort on this score is what is needed. I would doubt there are many in this room that could have gotten to this point today, at Augustana's 150th commencement, without some assistance. Someone, somewhere, at some time, in the last 22 years of your lives, extended their hand and helped you get to this point. A teacher staying late to make sure you understood the material. A parent who gave up their own pursuits to make sure you could achieve yours. A coach who taught you about life on and off the playing field, a close friend who helped you get over that broken heart. We've all been helped in some form or another, and as you embark on the next steps in your lives, always remember that the help you give to others will make differences larger than you can ever imagine. I want to close my comments by discussing personal self-efficacy with a quest that we all have to focus on ourselves, both professionally and personally. In November of last year, I received an email from a professor at Augustana. This professor occasionally sends emails out to a list of ex-students. And in this email, he was reflecting upon Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving and personal responsibility. And he notes the following, quote, "The problem for many of us is that we have allowed the process of counting our blessings to deteriorate into the habit of counting upon our blessings. We are proud, rightly proud, of our titles, positions, and resume. But we are now anxious, overly anxious, to maintain our privileges and power in this frightening and horrible economy. We are proud, rightly proud, of our personal achievements, but we are anxious, overly anxious, to maintain an image of success. When the act of counting our blessings leads to the anxious condition of counting upon our blessings, then it is extraordinarily difficult to be grateful." End quote. All of you will leave here today and go on to do incredible things with your lives. Focusing on your future, your jobs, your families, your achievements, and your own success is what we ask and expect of you. But as this professor points out, we can sometimes err on the side of too much self-focus. Obtaining advanced degrees, a successful and lucrative job, and a comfortable family life. Isn't that what most of us want after college? But the pursuit of these goals is not mutually exclusive to our ability and our responsibility of creating a more equitable world through a framework of social justice. We owe it to ourselves to improve the world our parents, grandparents, and others have created for us. All of us have hope, and especially faith, that you, Augustana, class of 2010, will help shape a world that we can be proud of. If we can learn to live with others, if we can learn to love others as much or more than we love ourselves, I think we'll be on the right track. Class of 2010, thank you very much.